Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this Nest Insight webinar to discuss our research published this morning, exploring the potential for responsible investment messaging as a motivator of pensions engagement. In a few minutes, I'll introduce the session properly and introduce our panel of speakers. But before I do that, just a few bits of housekeeping I wanted to go through. Kind of first and most importantly, please bear with us if there are any technical glitches. We've all been doing this for a few months now. I think we're all getting better at it, but you can never quite guarantee that there'll be nothing that goes wrong. So if there is anything, just bear with us. We've got various backup plans that will hopefully kick into gear pretty quickly. Second thing is, if your screen currently shows a set of equally sized boxes with all of us in it, if you want to click on the box showing the slides, that will expand the slides so that you can see them more easily. This is intended to be an interactive session, so please do post any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many of those as we can once our panelists have spoken. Please tweet as well on the event using the hashtag pension engagement. And we also just wanted to flag that this event is part of the Talk Money Week, which is an opportunity for everybody with an interest in financial wellbeing to get involved with events and activities across the UK, designed to help people to have more open conversations about money. Talk Money Week is organised by the Money and Pension Service. I just wanted to give a bit of a nod to that as well. Okay, so let's kick off the session. Many of you will know that at Nest Insight, one of our key research themes is around how we can help people saving for retirement under the automatic enrolment regime to build on this foundation to ensure they get the best possible outcomes in retirement. And one aspect of that is how we can move people from being disengaged and more inert savers to more actively engaged decision makers. So we've taken a real interest in the role that responsible investment messaging could play in this, given it's become something of a hot topic in the industry and has been held out by some as a potential silver bullet to the challenge of engagement, with some fairly heady claims made about what might be achievable using this approach. Our model at Nest Insight is very much to focus not just on the theory of what might work, but to try to identify and test solutions in the real world to explore what actually works. And our research today sets out the foundation on which we can progress to doing just that around responsible engagement messaging. I'd like to thank Legal & General Investment Management for supporting this work. I'd also like to thank our strategic partners Invesco for their support for our overall programme. Our ambitious programme of original research relies on partners like these, so we're really grateful for their support. I'd now like to introduce our three speakers for today. So my colleague Jo Phillips is Director of Research and Innovation at Nest Insight. She led this research and authored the report. Sarah Booth is Director of Retail, Brand and Marketing at OVO Energy. OVO Energy works to deliver more affordable, clean energy for everyone. And Sarah leads communications and marketing. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us today and for contributing to the report. And finally, Emma Douglas, who's Head of Defined Contribution at Legal & General Investment Management. Emma's been immersed in the pensions and investment management industries for over 20 years, and we're grateful for her time today and again to LGIM for supporting this work. So I'm going to hand over now to Jo to kick us off. Jo, could you tell us a bit more about the research and what we found?
Thank you, Will. Can I have the next slide, please, Gwen? So as Will said, this research programme aims to understand whether talking with people about the positive impact of their investments as a member of a pension scheme could make them more likely to engage more with their retirement saving. So we want to know, firstly, are messages that highlight investment impacts across environmental, social and governance, or ESG outcomes, any more effective at driving engagement than other messages that we might use and communicate with pension savers? And if so, if the answer to that is yes, how do we do it well? How can messages about these investment impacts be most effectively framed to drive that engagement? And what information do we need to include to boost understanding and attract people's attention? What language is most compelling, for example? And then finally, how do answers to these questions change, if at all, when looking at the response of different demographic groups? So do we see differences in younger versus older people, for example, or men versus women? So have the next slide, please. So today we're sharing our learnings from the first exploratory stage of this research programme. And our approach combined a desk research review of existing studies, as well as communications from pension schemes and organisations in other sectors. Also expert interviews and an online survey of Nest pension scheme members. This stage was designed to help us identify recommendations on how best to communicate around responsible investment and ESG issues to drive engagement, and also to prioritise and develop a set of messages to test in a behavioural trial, which will happen in the next stage, stage 2, and also in future research that others and we may conduct. I only have time, unfortunately, to give you the headlines of what we learned today. There's much more detail on all of this in the report, which you can find on our website now. Next slide, please. So during our expert interviews, we were lucky to speak to people with decades of experience between them in communicating environmental and ethical and social stories with customers and the public. And they'd worked across sectors as diverse as fast-moving consumer goods, food, drink, personal care, energy, automotive, and charities. And we've distilled all of that learning into these 5 principles. So the first principle for this kind of communication is that it has to be relevant to me. We know that people are more engaged by stories that are connected to their personal context, for example, relevant to their own region, their own work sector, their own circumstances. The second principle is that it has to come without sacrifice. People need to hear reassurance that there are no drawbacks to taking an environmentally and socially responsible approach, and that the essential features that they value in a product, whatever that product is, are uncompromised. The third principle is that it also has to be win-win. So as well as there being no compromise, people need to understand that there's a benefit for them in this personally, alongside any broader environmental social benefits. So what do I get from this? The fourth principle is that it has to be backed up. People do look for credible evidence and proof points. They're wary of anything that feels like greenwashing or virtue signaling, and have quite a keen eye out for marketing spin. The fifth principle is that it has to be simple, easier said than done, but we know people switch off when confronted with jargon or technical language. So I'm really delighted that Sarah is here today to share a perspective from outside our industry and bring some of these learnings to life. There are also examples of these principles in action in other sectors than ours in the report, including the ones shown here from Carlsberg Beer, keeping it simple, from Ariel laundry detergent, providing reassurance that the eco option involves no sacrifice, and from Ticker, making impact investment relevant to the COVID context by showing that I'm involved in the vaccine developments that we're all kind of hearing so much about today through the way that my money is invested. Next slide, please, Gwen. So the rest of the learnings I will share are primarily from the member survey that we conducted with Nest members. And going into the survey, we hypothesised that people would respond differently to the materials and the messages we shared with them, depending on their existing levels of engagement, both with ESG issues in general and also their engagement with pensions. So to explore this, we segmented the survey respondents against 2 different engagement axes. The first was higher versus lower engagement in ESG issues, and that's shown by the plant icon in this diagram. Respondents were classed as higher ESG engagement if they said that 4 or more ESG issues from out of a list of over 20 were extremely important to them personally. And in these icons, those with high engagement in ESG issues have the plant held high. And to be clear, this wasn't specific to pension. We're talking about general engagement in these issues day to day. The second axis we looked at was higher versus lower engagement with their pension, shown here by the piggy bank icon. So respondents were classed as higher pensions engagement if they said they'd visited their pension provider's website or logged into their pension account more than 5 times, or ever increased their pension contributions or transferred funds from one provider to another. And in the icons, those with high pensions engagement have the piggy bank held high. So by segmenting survey respondents against these axes, we could track any difference in responses across these 4 groups. We were particularly interested in the group that had higher ESG issue engagement and lower pension engagement. So those in the top left quadrant here, who made up just under 1 in 5 people in the survey. This is the group for whom talking about ESG issues in the context of pensions could have the greatest potential for new engagement with pension saving, taking something that they're interested in other parts of their life and making it relevant to an area that they are currently less engaged with. We did see differences by these typology, in some cases, quite strong differences, and I'll share a couple of those this morning. Next slide, please. Talking about ESG issues or responsible investment means talking to pension savers about how their money is invested. But we have to remember that a lot of pension savers are not aware that their money is invested. The very concept is new to people. In our member research, 3 out of 5 people said either that they don't understand pensions and find it all a bit confusing, or that they have a basic understanding but don't know much about the details. So that's most people in the survey we did. And this means we can't rush straight to messages about the positive impact of investments without first going through steps in a journey to build foundational understanding. starting with raising awareness that I have a pension and that it's invested for growth to give me an income in retirement. Engagement is clearly a journey, and from this starting point of low knowledge and awareness, we should be realistic about what outcomes it might be possible and desirable to drive by talking about responsible investments. Although there are high hopes in the industry that it could lead to people contributing more, to begin with, perhaps providers and scheme trustees may wish to start by targeting first step behaviours, first step stages in engagement, such as a member going to look at the pension website for the first time or logging into their pension account for the first time. And then behaviours like checking a forecast or a calculator or considering whether to increase contributions beyond the minimum amounts could follow. Next slide, please. Given the need to build that understanding around investment, we explored whether an ESG lens could help with explaining this concept. We tested 3 simple explanations of how pensions are invested to grow your money: a more traditional description with no reference to ESG issues at all, a general description of a responsible investment approach, and a description that talked about ESG criteria specifically. And all of the messages we tested that I'll share here and kind of further into this can be found in full in the report if you want to look at the exact sort of wording and kind of framing that we used. So among the Nest members we surveyed, the responsible investment message had the broadest appeal, with 9 in 10 people ranking it as the description that they would be most likely or second most likely to take notice of, and just over half of them ranking it first. And we asked people to provide feedback on the descriptions, and we heard that the responsible investment description communicated good financial returns and trustworthiness. Nearly 6 in 10 people said that the pension provider describing investments in this way would get the best growth for their pension pot out of the 3, and half said they would trust this provider out of the 3 the most to look after their pot. Responses to the ESG scoring description were more mixed, with around 3 in 10 members saying they would be most likely to take notice of this description. And overall, throughout the research, we found that ESG is unlikely to be a term that engages pension scheme members effectively. The term responsible investment seems to work better by conveying that prudence and safety in the way that pension money is looked after for the member, at the same time as communicating a focus on investing more sustainably for the future. The traditional investment description, with no mention of responsible investment or ESG issues, was ranked as the least engaging overall, although it is worth noting that a significant minority, 1 in 5, did say they'd be most likely to take notice of this. May I have the next slide, please? So we also explored how much weight a responsible investment message should be given in communications from a pension provider. We developed 3 different versions of an email giving information about how a pension pot is invested and including a call to action encouraging people to log into their pension account and find out more. These were email mock-ups in the survey that we did. One version did not mention responsible investment at all. One gave some information about responsible investment, but only as a secondary supporting message in the email. And the third led with that responsible investment message. The responsible investment led email had the highest proportion of members, again ranking it as the one they would be most likely to read and act on, with just over 4 in 10 ranking this message first, versus 3 in 10 for the email with responsible investment as a supporting message, and just under 3 in 10 for the email that didn't mention responsible investment at all. However, it's worth knowing that given the difference between these responses is more marginal than the differences we looked at on the previous slide, that the email that included information about responsible investment as a supporting message had the broadest appeal. So although it didn't score top, it appealed most broadly to people, with 9 in 10 people ranking it as the email they would either be most or second most likely to read and act on. So perhaps if we need to find a middle ground as a starting point, the kind of supporting message works best for most people. Can I have the next slide, please? Importantly, though, that the responsible investment messages were not the most powerful for everybody. So among that group with both lower engagement in ESG issues and lower engagement in pensions, 5.5 out of 10 ranked the message with no mention of responsible investment as the one that they would be most likely to be acted on. So more than half of that group ranked the message that didn't mention it at all as the one they'd be most likely to act on. I think it's unlikely that there's a risk of negative impact if a responsible investment focused message is sent to someone who isn't interested in the issues and isn't engaged in their pension. but it is worth knowing that it may not be the most effective way to boost their engagement, that it may not work for them, and there may be other things that may work better. Next slide, please. So ESG, responsible investment, they're broad terms. It's a very kind of big umbrella subject that we're talking about here. So within that, we explored whether there are specific issues that matter more to most people. As one of our experts said, everyone's views are different and vary depending on personal values and circumstances. And while investment professionals may need to look across the whole suite of these issues when managing money and thinking about investment risks and looking ahead, from the point of view of engaging people, there may be particular hooks within ESG, within responsible investment, that are more meaningful to people, that attract greater interest. So we were able to see a consensus of interest and importance around some issues across a broad range of pension savers in our survey. The two issues at the top of the table here that were both most important to people and also elicited the greatest strength of feeling were tackling climate change and everyone being paid a living wage. I think looking at this table, the COVID-19 crisis has likely intensified the relevance of some of the higher ranked issues shown in this table, including everyone being paid a living wage, availability of good education, fair treatment of workers, and availability of good hospitals. And the quotation on this slide here from a member brings this to life, that people are perhaps sort of thinking differently or taking notice of different social issues in our current context. Another thing looking at this table that is apparent is that the relative importance ranking of the issues demonstrated that issues which impact people at a household or a community level are likely to be of higher interest and have higher potential to engage than those which feel more distant. So more immediate ways of describing issues are ranked as being more important to people than more abstract or technical ways of expressing them. For example, protecting natural habitats ranked higher than biodiversity, reasonable executive pay and availability and fair treatment of workers ranked higher than equality and diversity, and availability of good hospitals ranked higher than reducing levels of health issues in the world. And then finally, there were some significant differences in responses by gender for some of the issues that are marked with an asterisk to the left in the table. And this was particularly true of issues that would fall under the sort of social and governance headings. So, for example, 94% of women ranked fair treatment of workers as very important to them personally, compared to 77% of men. 73% of women ranked equality and diversity in the workplace, including representation at boardroom level, as personally important to them, compared with only 43% of men. So quite big differences there in terms of the relative importance of some of these issues by gender. Looking ahead, it seems likely that personalising messages to people's local context and circumstances could be powerful, going back to that first make it relevant principle, and there are some differences in terms of what people are interested in. Can I have the next slide, please? So the last thing we explored was framing of messages, and it's well known that the way a message is said can impact the way people respond to it. So we developed our learnings from the desk research and expert interviews into 5 pairs of message, each pair framing a similar concept in differing ways. So, for example, the top pair here, one message talked about a proactively good investment approach. So we are investing your money in companies that are fighting climate change and uphold human rights across their supply chain. And then its message pair talked about a similar approach, but framed in terms of avoiding the bad. So we do not invest your money in companies that have high fossil fuel use or employ child labour in their supply chain. In each case, the message was very similar, but framed from a different angle. We saw a relatively strong member preference for a message that frames investment as proactively doing good over a message that frames it as avoiding the bad, with 7 out of 10 preferring the proactively good frame. We also saw a slight preference for a framing that describes the collective impact of investments over one discussing my individual impact from my saving. Also a slight preference for a description that gives specific examples of investment impact over one outlining general principles for investment. And a slight preference for a message that highlights the local impact of investments over one talking about their global impact. Responses to messages describing the potential financial or emotional returns of a responsible investment approach were more mixed, suggesting that a combination of these frames would likely be more effective than either in isolation. Can I have the next slide, please? So again, responses to these messages varied across the 4 engagement groups I described at the start. So those with higher ESG issues engagement and lower pensions engagement, highlighted in orange here, that group that were possibly the most likely to be most engaged in their pension savings, talking about responsible investment, showed a stronger preference for the proactively good framing. 8 out of 10 of them preferred that message. It seems that perhaps positivity may be even more powerful for those who care about the issues. And that least engaged group, those with lower ESG issue engagement and lower pension group, were more likely to prefer that general impact message. Perhaps that suggests a lower level of interest in the detail and the need to start from broader principles. And then the group with lower engagement in ESG issues and higher engagement with pensions showed a slightly stronger preference for the individual impact message and a much stronger preference for the financial returns message and the local impact message. So this maybe points to a more individualistic outlook in that group and a stronger need to see the connection and benefit for me. Can I have the next slide, please, Gwen? So to sum up, can talking with people about ESG issues get them more engaged in their retirement saving? The findings from our exploratory research suggest that talking to pension scheme members about how their retirement savings are responsibly invested does have the potential to build some new engagement and to reach people who may not have been engaged in their retirement saving by other communications. However, it's also clear that this is by no means the solution to pension engagement for everyone or easy to do in practice. Research in this area to date has extrapolated from what people say they might do to conclude that this kind of approach will be effective, but we know that there's a gap between people's stated intentions and their real behaviour. So we think there's some more work to be done before we can be more confident that communications around ESG will be effective when deployed in a real world setting. But there is a real opportunity to build a sense of empowerment, to engage people in an area of personal finance that perhaps is considered boring or kind of not as interesting as other areas. And to more fundamentally, it may help people take that first or second behavioural step towards building greater financial security in later life. In the second stage of our research programme, we'll be testing just that. Our next step is to conduct an email-based randomised control trial of some of these different messages with NEST members and see which ones perform better or worse and whether there are differences by different groups. And we look forward to being able to share the findings from this trial next year. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jo, for running us through the research. I'm now going to turn to Sarah and ask her to talk to us. And I think Sarah's going to give us a perspective from outside the pensions industry, which is great and maybe something we should do more as an industry in these events. So looking forward to hearing what Sarah has to say. Sarah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Will, and thanks, Jo, for taking us through the research, which I've personally found incredibly interesting. So my name's Sarah. I'm from OVO Energy, or OVO, and as part of that, OVO Energy is one of our domestic supply brands. Just as a quick kind of overview, if you guys are not aware of OVO, we're an ENTech company, so an energy technology company that were founded in 2009. And it's our strong belief that there's a pressing need for us to transition away from fossil fuels as a nation and as a world, but that also that we have a real role to play with that within that as an energy company. So OVO Group is made up of a number of domestic energy supply companies, so basically the people you buy your household energy from. We have 5 million domestic customers in the UK, and we're also a kind of group of tech companies who are also looking to develop the technologies that can support a move to a decentralized, decarbonised energy system of the future. I'd recommend looking that up rather than me going into it if you guys want to know a bit more about that, but it's a genuinely fascinating opportunity for us in the world. If we pop onto the next slide, as an energy company, we believe that we've got a real opportunity to be at the forefront of the shift from a fossil fuel heavy energy supply system to a renewably generated energy supply system. And we believe that energy has an opportunity to be at the forefront of tackling the climate crisis. You guys probably don't know, I didn't know, many of our members, we call our customers our members, do not know that at least 25% of your carbon footprint is made up from your domestic energy, from your home energy. So there's a huge opportunity to make a real difference to your carbon footprint and the impact you have on the world through your energy. So obviously it feels like we have an opportunity to be at the forefront of tackling the climate crisis. Everybody needs energy. So we've got a bit of a head start in terms of we've got lots of people who could be involved in that as a community to make change, but they don't already necessarily think about energy as an opportunity for them to be involved in tackling the climate crisis. However, they are already doing it in some ways. They've already got kind of some sort of skin in the game. And as we electrify transport and as we move towards an electrification of all of our vehicles, we've got more of a role to play, because all of those vehicles will need to be charged up. And as they get charged up with energy, we will not have enough renewable electricity at the moment on the grid in order to support that shift, potentially by up to 50%, which means that collectively we all have to do something quite significant in order to shift the way we use our energy so that we have enough renewable energy. It's not because there isn't enough renewable energy available in the world. In fact, just the sun in one day could power the whole world for a year. But we just need to make sure that we're using our supply well and our systems are set up for the future. So there's quite a lot to do. If we pop onto the next slide, what we've done as a business is we've put this vision at the centre of our business. Our business mission is to drive progress to net zero carbon living, and we've launched a plan called Plan Zero, which sits at the heart of absolutely everything we do and has 6 aims underneath it. 2 of which I think are really interesting. So we want to help our members to be a part of a zero carbon living community and help them to halve their personal carbon footprints by 2030. And the second that's interesting is that in wanting to lead the transition to a zero carbon energy system, we want to optimize 5 million homes with flexible low carbon technologies by 2030. That includes things like smart meters, but it goes further than that. And obviously, therefore, you have to engage quite a large group of people in actions and behaviours that take them closer to taking part in tackling the climate crisis. So I always say to our teams, okay, Plan Zero isn't the outcome, Plan Zero is our brief. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll just talk about kind of how we see that and what we're trying to plot. So we want to really plot a journey to the success of Plan Zero, from where we are today to all of those objectives that we've talked about. We're a commercial business, as most of us most of us on the call will also be part of. So we need to make sure that in doing that, we also power the commercial success of our business. I always kind of say you can't really change the world if you've gone out of business, guys. So when I think you can end up in companies like this having people with really idealistic views, and it's really important to connect those teams into the need to create the products and services that can power that change, that are relevant to customers, and that will therefore generate the right returns for the business in order that we can continue on our mission. And then my team's particular role, supporting the commercial plan and supporting the products and services that will take us to Plan Zero success, is to understand what we should say to people in order to bring them on that journey, understand where they sit today and understand where we need to get them to tomorrow, whether our messages should be implicit or explicit, etc. I'm not going to go into loads of detail, but I'm just going to reflect on a few charts that have come from some different pieces of research that we've done that I think reflect some of the similar findings that we've seen today in the report that the guys have put together, and I think probably are consistent truths across most of the industries that are looking to tackle climate change. So the first one is, I think, speaks a little bit to kind of the idea of relevance and no sacrifice, but it really taps into the idea of kind of who people want to take responsibility for this, and also how they want to feel about what happens. So we basically, when we were looking at Plan Zero, we were looking at the idea of community, and what's really clear to us is that what we see in the energy industry is when people think about even that 25% of their carbon footprint that's taken up by their home energy and their ability to change it, they see it as a bit of a drop in the ocean in comparison with the task to be done. So they sometimes feel like, well, yeah, okay, like I could get rid of 25% of my carbon footprint, but it's not really going to make that much difference. So we were exploring the opportunity of community and the sense of a collective impact to motivate people. But when you look at that on a spectrum, I think it's quite interesting. People don't want to take 100% responsibility for their own actions because they don't think they should have to, and they think that businesses should be responsible. But they also don't want to take responsibility for communities that they are a part of, because they don't want to have to kind of knock on next door's door and say, oi, you guys need to be doing a better job with your energy wastage. So they want something in between, and it's that sweet spot that we really look to when we're trying to talk to people about a community that they're part of. And so what we think of as being a brand that leads an agenda that people can take part of, a brand that's taking responsibility and making it easier for them, creating a community that they can feel a part of, but a community that they're not necessarily responsible for. And so it makes people feel like they're part of something bigger, and it taps into kind of what we call, we don't call this out loud very often, but we think of as slightly egotistical altruism, as a kind of quite individual society. And one of the research companies that we were working with kind of helped us to understand how often altruism, particularly collectivism within the UK society, is often framed in kind of what you can tell your friends that you're a part of. So we often think about that as kind of, you've done this amazing thing with this community, this is your collective impact, and here are the things that you can be proud of in bite-sized chunks that people can tell people that they've been a part of, because that not only drives a word of mouth benefit for us, but it also has the right sense and structure of community. If we go on to the next slide, I think this probably just brings that to the fore a little bit more, that sense of social proof. I want to be part of something. I really like it when I can see clear that I've been a part of a big number, I've been a part of big change. I like the idea that I'm in a collective with like-minded people. I really like the idea that I've been rewarded for those good behaviours, that they've paid me back in some way. Now that can be, you know, thank you very much for being part of stepping your own carbon footprint forwards more than some of the other people in the community. But it can also be, we're going to do some community initiatives to reward everybody's actions, or it could be, these are the ways that you reduce energy wastage and therefore save yourself money. We don't see, if you say, would you like to connect with and communicate with these other people in this community, it's quite a virtual community at the moment. It's a sense of we're all doing the same thing, but I don't need to be mates with them. And certainly no one wants any responsibility for anyone else's behaviour. So it really sort of tempers and balances the way that we talk about what we're doing in the collectivism in a way that is really engaging with everybody who's involved. If we pop onto the next slide, this one I think just picks up a couple of things around terms that Joe was talking about. We've done a lot of research on this, and we come back to it a lot, even the ideas of things like zero carbon living and things like that. We're just quite careful how we deploy them, and understanding that people don't necessarily understand everything that they mean. This chart I think was quite fascinating because it looks, the block charts, the blocks look at people who were in our response groups who totally understand some of the terms that we might, as people working in this day-to-day, think are relatively easy to understand, and also things that they haven't heard of at all. So only about 30% of people felt like they understood climate change, global warming, and less carbon footprint, which are real terms that we would use a lot. So we're really aware that we need to be explaining things that we might think are quite normal to be using. I'm not going to use the word basic, but quite every day we might think that because we're working on it a lot. It's actually not every day for lots of people. And then when we start to talk about things like the 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees limit that we're working to, the climate agreement, things like a carbon budget, it's sort of tumbleweed out there. So it's not particularly useful for us to use this kind of language. So we're really careful the language we use to make sure that people don't feel excluded by it. And I think one of the points I made to Joe as we were talking in the interviews that we did was it's an interesting arena in that it's been scientific for so long that in ways that other industries don't struggle with, or other topics don't struggle with, the scientific language creeps into consumer facing language, and people feel very uncomfortable about making it more accessible. But I think that's something that we kind of all have to tackle together, because it's very difficult for people to understand this kind of stuff. And actually I'd say it's more detrimental to force scientific language into people's lives that they don't understand and can't engage with, than it is to say something that's a bit more a bit softer, a bit easier to understand, but not quite as precise. And then just a really funny quote that I always really like to remind us is we had an argument about decarbonisation versus carbon footprints, and this quote from a focus group taught me everything that I needed to know about which was the right way to go forwards. So I won't dwell on that, but I quite enjoyed it and I thought I'd show you it. And then the final slide that I've got is just about the fact that we're really aware that we want people to come on a journey with us, but everybody's starting from a different place. And we need to create a journey that supports everybody in making a difference. And that really is about kind of understanding where different parts of our communities are starting from, the motivators that they have, whether climate change is something that they're now making decisions based on, or whether it's something that they worry about slightly, but frankly, you know, they might be struggling to make ends meet. They've got loads of other things going on. They just want an energy provider. And we think about what we provide for different people and different parts of our brands and different parts of our brand portfolio based on this. So say you've got a hardworking family who's struggling to make ends meet, don't mind the idea of sustainability, but probably aren't prioritizing it because there's other things on their mind. We try and give them brilliant energy basics and the Billy bonus of, do you know what, when you were doing this, when you were buying your normal energy, you've actually been part of change, because it makes people feel great, but they haven't had to make the decision based on it. And you look through to how do we create the opportunity for those people who really environmental thought leaders who really want to be at the forefront of changing their homes and doing different things to really step forwards and maybe even become climate positive in their lifestyle. How do you give them the kind of energy couture of energy and enable them to be part of something, but also use that to tell stories to everybody else about the journeys that they can go on and what you're part of, to build credibility in the business that we're running. And it's really important that we think carefully about our brand portfolio to allow people to step through that easily, to get a little bit more confident and to take the next step as an individual, or that we also recognize that mindsets are changing. So we see growth in the top 2 tiers kind of quarter on quarter in the tracking studies, and we need to make sure that it's not in our brand portfolio difficult as mindsets shift for us to shift people along the journey faster. So we think quite carefully about that as well, and the kind of transience of the mindset in the population around this in order to help us to manage the whole portfolio. I hope that's kind of a little bit interesting, quite a little whistle stop of what we've learned, some of the bits that maybe also chime with things that have been found in this study.
Thank you, Sarah. Certainly from my perspective, more than a little bit interesting, and we're getting some good questions coming in, prompted by what's been said so far as well, which we'll try and get to. But before we do, I'm now going to hand over to Emma, who I think is going to talk to us a bit more about some of LGIM's broader thinking and research in this space. So Emma, over to you.
Thanks very much, Will. Yeah, fascinating to hear what Joe and Sarah have said so far. So if we could move on to the next slide, Gwyn, I just wanted to really share my views as to whether ESG is the silver bullet for member engagement. And I'm going to be using the intergenerational research that we did last year. And much of this aligns very closely with the research that you've already heard about from Joe. So we could move on to the next slide, please. I hope you can see there that we've got a wide range of generations on that slide. And I always check out which generation I'm in, because, you know, it varies a little bit. I'm sort of top end of X, but I won't make anyone else say where they are on the generations. And I think one of the key findings that we found from our research is, you know, just as with the Nest research, was that really the acronym ESG means almost nothing to members. So if it is to be a silver bullet, it will certainly need a new name. And the next finding is again the same. We had to explain to people that their pension pot was invested in companies, and in companies that they've heard of. And of course, for many, this was actually news to them. Now, I don't think this point will be a surprise to any of you in the audience today, as we know that most people don't have a lot of time or inclination to think about their pensions. And even when they do, they're going to be more focused on what they're going to get rather than how their money is invested. So as I mentioned, ESG, or even spelling it out, environmental, social and governance issues, or to be honest, even responsible investing, didn't mean much to anyone. But people really came alive when we discussed the underlying themes in terms that they connected with. So climate change, human exploitation and fair pay. Now, these are everyday concerns and realities in their lives, and they move ESG in pensions from what can appear like an academic exercise to chime with the issues that scheme members are reading and talking about. And when we looked in a little more detail at the generational and general attitudes, we found that millennials cared most about climate change and that baby boomers were more concerned about the value of their pension pot. But their comments showed that this was mainly because they could actually see themselves needing that money shortly. Then when we added in the gender lens as well, we found that millennial men were least interested in climate issues, with apologies to any millennial men listening to the webinar today, and boomer men were most concerned about social issues in a sort of Bill Gates kind of way. And boomer and Gen X women were up in arms about pay issues, having lived experience of the gender pay gap. And this finding really struck a chord with me. So more than 70% of the female over 40s would divest from a company on pay practices. And of course, it's a hard fact that the gender pay gap is one of the key causes of the gender pensions gap. So although ESG issues, when explained clearly, are seen as important, different issues resonate more strongly with different groups. And I think we've absolutely heard that from what Joe and Sarah have said already today. So to really stretch the analogy to a point where perhaps it doesn't really work anymore, perhaps there isn't one silver bullet, it's a series of bullets. So if we can move on to the next slide, Gwen. Yeah, having said that it's a series of bullets, overall, most of our survey participants preferred engagement to divestment. So they would prefer us to work with companies, change how they act through engagement and voting on the key issues, rather than by simply selling the stock. And we also had a strong response in that nearly 3/4 of the members surveyed said they were more likely to engage with their pension when they know that their money is invested in urban regeneration, affordable housing, and clean energy. And of course, if members do engage more, and that leads them to contribute more, though I do accept that's a final step, as Joe mentioned, we want to engage, look at things, and then hopefully contribute more over time. It can really make a difference to their income in retirement. So our fabulous solutions team were doing some calculations on an average member who contributes, say, 8% from the age of 25. And if this member pays 4% extra, which is £67 per month, or the cost of one coffee shop coffee a day, they could have nearly 100,000 extra in their pot when they get to retirement, which of course will buy a lot more coffee in retirement. So there's some real skin in the game here if we can get people to engage with their pension by using this ESG lens. But of course, and Joe highlighted this too, what people say in a survey and what they do can be very different. So I would also like to highlight the recent experience we've had in working with Tomello. They're a fabulous fintech that lets members indicate how they would vote on the key corporate issues if they could vote their shares in a pooled fund. And we've seen some very exciting results in terms of numbers who participated. With our pilot client, we had 3,500 votes cast in a couple of months. And we've also seen the impact of Make My Money Matter, led by Richard Curtis. Now, he spoke at our Master Trust member forum last month, attracting record crowds with over 2,000 members registering. And he was very strong on the point that Joe made in terms of members not wanting to make a sacrifice for their principles. So he made it very clear that the Make My Money Matter campaign is not about giving up value for your values or swapping money for morals. Investing in this way makes financial sense. It's not just about feeling good. And I think that's a really important point to get across to members. And of course, for members, the agenda of racial equality, gender equality, and action on climate is not going anywhere. And we do need to make sure that members understand how important their pension monies can be in driving positive change. And ultimately, of course, for all members, there's no point in retiring with a lot of money if you're living on a dead planet. Thank you.
Okay, great. Emma, thanks. That was That was great, and to all our speakers, thank you very much. So I'm now heavily regretting that we only gave ourselves an hour for this session, because I think there's been a lot of great content for us to get into, and we've had some good questions in, and I suspect I'm not going to get to any of the questions that I wanted to ask as a consequence. But just in the few minutes that we have for questions, I'm going to try and kind of group a couple together by theme, because this idea of, do you have any evidence for whether people are choosing OVO primarily because of the environmental credentials, or actually is a lot of it just because of tariff prices and sort of competition on price, and a broader question as well that we've had that's just around where we see the evidence around this no sacrifice idea, given that sort of, at least hypothetically, one might imagine that environmental concerns in the end will generally be crowded out by financial ones. So maybe Sarah, if we could start with you, but then Emma and Joe as well. Any broader thoughts on the evidence base for this idea of has to come without sacrifice, which seems to have struck a chord with people?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of no sacrifice is incredibly important to us, and it's one of the filters that we put over everything that we do. So nothing ever goes out if it looks like it would be sacrificed. Like, it's really important to say, if you're particularly in our industry, when you're looking at the lifestyles that people have, that they enjoy, and the fact that humans are people who like to live a better life than the generations that have gone before them. Human progress is kind of really important to us. This is just a human fact that not very many people really are prepared to accept less in order for the planet's gain, and that's kind of through behavioral economics. I mean, we just know, but we also see in all of the research, if we ever say, kind of do something less fun, it goes dreadfully badly, versus trying to look at the positives and the richness of a lower carbon life. We spent quite a lot of time talking with Professor Mike Berners-Lee, who is an expert in kind of climate change and carbon footprints, and he's got a really lovely philosophy that a carbon-free life can be a richer life, a warmer life, a more enjoyable life, and we really do try to bring that through everything we do, and talk about like the benefits of eating seasonally, or of walking rather than going in the car, the lovely kind of moments that you get to enjoy when you do those things, of spending time in nature, and also of kind of using your home energy better rather than using less. No one wants to sit in the dark with the heating off, obviously, and that's kind of the worst case scenario of what it kind of slightly feels like when we start to talk about saving energy. So we use the language of things like wastage rather than reduction, because it's much more meaningful to people, and we just have this really strong filter on, if it feels like life's going to be more rubbish when you make that change, no one's going to make it, so let's not talk about it, let's find a new way through.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And Emma, Joe, anything to add on the no sacrifice idea?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we did find that there was a real balance between, wanting to invest in line with your principles and actually wanting to have a decent sum of money at retirement. It's just so important. But so I think the key messages are, investing in this way makes financial sense. Where are the companies that are going to succeed in the future? They are likely to be doing clean energy, like OVO are. They're likely to be doing regeneration. They're going to have green revenues coming through, and these are the revenues that are really going to be sustainable in the future. So it's packaging all of that up. And I totally agree with Sarah. We should be looking to make this a positive statement. And we did have the odd little bit of sort of negativity come back in some of our research. And I think, it sounds quite similar in the Nest research from Joe of, one respondent said, well, I don't really care about how Dave at Aldi is treated. I only care that I get a good enough pension at the end of the day. So it's all about which I see Sarah making a face, a pretty harsh statement, but that was a literal fact statement that came out of the research. So, we've got to balance people's own interests with this, this broader picture, doing good. But I think the great thing is that these are aligning. These are not separate messages. This is not having to make a sacrifice, and that makes all the difference, I think, in the communication.
Great, thanks, Emma. Joe, do you want to add anything, or shall I move on? We've got some other questions, so I don't want to.
I think just on language, some of the scheme communications that we saw talked about an ESG investment approach as being innovative or leading edge, and we saw that people sort of responded to that, you know, that might suggest some risk. And actually, particularly at the moment in the COVID context, with, you know, everything feeling very uncertain, anything that reassures people that this is, you know, not just a better way of investing from the point of view of financial returns, but also sort of safer, more secure, more prudent, I think sort of addresses that idea of the kind of risk side of sacrifice.
Great, thanks. So I've got a great question here, and I guess it relates to any of the research that any of the three organisations represented on the panel have done, which is about climate change denial. So have any of you seen evidence in the research of specifically on climate change, kind of a pocket of people who are just sceptical that it's a problem and therefore not engaged by this? And if so, are there a lot of them, and do they tend to concentrate within any one demographic, or is it not really something that we've seen? I don't know whether maybe Emma, kicking off with you from your research perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we do see a bit of that, Will, but what I would say is it's changing really, really quickly. So, you know, maybe just taking it to a slightly different level that wasn't in the research, but just looking at the pension schemes that I work with, you know, maybe, you know, a couple of years ago, there'd be a lot of people who were sort of skeptical about, you know, do you really need to change how you're investing? You know, there's still lots of returns out there from kind of, you know, the sin stocks as opposed to the good stocks. But I've seen so much change happening so quickly now, and even the real refuseniks are now absolutely moving into the camp of, you know, how can we decarbonize, moving entire portfolios across. So that's a massive change. Now that's at a scheme level, you know, knowledgeable trustees and their advisors, but that pace is quickening so fast. And, you know, not so many years ago, you know, even a couple of years ago, I'd say there was a definite camp who were in the, I'm not sure that this is particularly material, you know, it's nice to have, but it's not going to be financially important. Now, I think there's so many more people buying into the fact that this is financially important. It makes sense to invest in this way. You know, this is the way that we need to invest for the future. So big change there. At the individual level, yes, one or two, but not a huge trend.
Great, thanks, Emma. I'm going to ask one final question and give each of you a chance. Just give us a quick answer, and then we should wrap up. So just curious, this has come up again a couple of times. Are there risks in this engagement approach? Is there anything that we feel could go wrong? And is there a COVID angle to that? Is now a particularly better or more challenging time to be trying to engage people on these kinds of topics? So just sort of quickish answers from each of you. We'll start with Sarah.
Good question. COVID angle, I would say it's about context, isn't it, and relevance, and where people are at any given time. If somebody's suddenly lost their job or they're on furlough, and you're trying to sell to them via the lens of the climate rather than the things that they need in their immediate moment right now, then it probably won't land. In terms of broader risk, I think we certainly believe that there's an opportunity to build back better. We're really interested in the build back better narrative and the opportunity to kind of come out of lockdown, hopefully into a period where we've got a vaccine and things are moving forwards, and to use some of the opportunities that we've had to pause to change things positively. There's always, I don't know, I don't see it as a risk. I see it as a sort of mandatory brief to all of us in business to try and work out a positive way to build climate and other responsibility through everything that we do, and so that it's just a BAU.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Emma.
Yeah, I think there are risks if we focus purely on sort of the environmental side of things, and we don't focus on the end goal, the return. So, you know, it is getting the balance there, and you know, we do want people to actually engage more because of these messages, but we need to see that follow through. So, you know, you look at it, you feel good. Do you do anything about it? You know, do you go on and look at a pensions calculator? Do you see what your retirement's going to be? Do you make those extra contributions that are really going to make a difference to your standard of living in retirement? So that's looking at it from a pensions lens. I think that we need to make sure that engagement leads on to action. And that's always a struggle. You know, it's been a struggle for the 20 years I've been involved in DC pensions. It will continue to be a struggle. But now we know we've got this other weapon in our armory to try and get people to look at their pension through this ESG lens. And I'd say COVID the focus on inequalities, the worry about day-to-day life, I think it's probably a better time to use that as a lens than it has been to date.
Great, thank you, Emma. And last word, Joe?
Yeah, when Sarah and I spoke a few months back, it was at the time of the headlines about Boohoo and factories in Leicester. And I think, although people have limited headspace and energy at the moment, they also, at any point of disruption, we reevaluate, we think of new things. And so there are definitely, amongst sort of some of the issues we've talked about, and Emma very much talked about, the way in is through the issues that people care about. There are definitely new engagement hooks there. I think in a way that the risk is not thinking about what behavioural outcomes we're looking to drive. A lot of the experts we spoke to sort of said we don't really want people necessarily jumping straight to making different investment choices. This is about getting them to feel empowered and take the first steps with their retirement saving to know what they have, that it's there, to start to think about what it means for them. So I think thinking really carefully about, as Emma said, what's the link between the engagement and the action, but what is the right action for that individual at this stage in their journey.
Great, thank you so much. I'm sorry we haven't had time for a longer discussion. It's been great. Thank you very much to all of our speakers today. Thank you again to Legal and General Investment Management for supporting this programme of work. Thank you all for joining us and for engaging with us and posing some great questions. We do have several more events coming up before the end of the year, so please make sure that you're on our mailing list and keeping up with our website and our various other mechanisms of contact. And please do get in touch. Our contact details are there on the screen if you'd like to know more about this research or any other of our research, or to support our work in any way. So thank you all again. It's been a really great session and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you.